evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Mehlaka Samdani. I am director at the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice. The Community Alliance is an advocacy group that seeks to impact policy and public opinion on issues related to the Middle East and South Asia. We do this through congressional engagement, mass media campaigns, and policy analysis. So on behalf of the Community Alliance, I'd like to welcome you all to our event today with Dr. Jill Stein. Our event is part of the Connecting with the Candidate series, in which we will provide opportunities for our community and our voters to meet with presidential and congressional candidates, learn more about their policy positions, and make informed decisions in the upcoming elections. Tonight, we are delighted to host Dr. Jill Stein, who's our first guest in the series. She is a U.S. presidential candidate for the Green Party. She is also a Harvard-educated doctor, a pioneering environmental health advocate, and an organizer for People, Planet, and Peace. She has helped lead initiatives to fight environmental racism, injustice, and pollution, to promote healthy communities and to revitalize democracy. She has helped win victories in campaign finance reform, racially just redistricting, and the cleanup of incinerators, coal plants, and other toxic threats. She was a principal organizer for the Global Climate Convergence for People, Planet, and Peace over Profit. Dr. Stein, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my honor and pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. So before I begin, Dr. Stein, I'm just going to quickly tell our audience what the format of our discussion will be. So Dr. Sarvat Patel and myself are going to co-moderate this event. For the first half an hour, we're going to ask Dr. Stein a series of questions, after which we will open it up for audience Q&A. Please submit your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll try and get to as many as possible. So without further ado, I'm now going to turn to Dr. Stein. So let me ask you the most obvious question, right? So you have run for president as a Green Party candidate twice, once in 2012 and then in 2016. So in 2024, what has compelled you to run again?
All the reasons that I ran in 2012 and 2016 and more. And, you know, I entered the race in 2012. You know, really, this was now about 10 years into my experience running as a candidate. And so let me just back up to say that, I describe myself as a mother on fire, as a medical doctor turning from clinical medicine to political medicine so we can address the mother of all illnesses, our sick political system. And basically, as a medical doctor, I found that we can't solve our problems after the fact in the clinic. Healthcare is critical, but it's not enough. We have to stop the systems that are fundamentally making us sick. And as a doctor, I became involved in community level initiatives to clean up our air, to make healthy food available to people, to address poverty, which is, the number 4 cause of mortality in this country, to address the violence of war, for example. And I worked with Physicians for Social Responsibility to try to push back against nuclear weapons, potentially the largest source of mortality in the world today. And I found on issue after issue, whether we were looking at making housing available or jobs and living wages, we're up against a system where those who are doing very well are sponsoring our political system. And so you have basically our government is working to protect powerful special interests, working to protect profits rather than protecting people. That's how I became involved in cleaning up campaign finance to get this, this overarching problem of a money-sponsored political system where political candidates are basically providing payback to their big donors. So I was involved in cleaning that up. We actually were successful. We passed this, here in Massachusetts in the late 1990s. We passed so-called clean elections by voter referendum because our progressive legislature wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. We, the people, passed campaign finance reform by a 2-to-1 margin. And shortly after we passed it, the progressive Democratic majority repealed it on a voice vote. And that to me was sort of the last straw, and said to me that we have to run outside of the system and we have to challenge the system. It was around that time that I was tricked into running for office for the first time as a very frustrated advocate, finding that we're not moving forward, we're just moving backwards. And fundamentally, we have to challenge the system if we're gonna, save our lives and our children's future. And so I entered that first race out of desperation, came out of it with a whole lot of inspiration, seeing that once you get outside of this money-sponsored system, there's much more flexibility. We can talk to each other as human beings. We don't have corporate agendas that we're carrying for our big donors. And I got very excited about what we can do in the realm of independent politics. Fast forward to, 2012, I was arm twisted again, would I run at the national level? And I found that, again, our agenda for healthcare as a human right, for the right to a job, for green jobs, in fact, to address the climate crisis. This was sort of the beginnings of the Green New Deal, for demilitarizing our foreign policy so that we have a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy instead of on raw military power. That those ideas, their time had come and people were very interested in them. We were silenced as an independent political party. They try to keep you out of the mix because these ideas are powerful at a time when people are dropping out of this system that has thrown everyday people under the bus. So in 2012 and 2016, it felt like we were gaining momentum. And in 2024, we had another candidate, Dr. Cornel West, who I had helped recruit to be our candidate. And he, for totally understandable reasons, found that it was very hard to build a relationship with a party when you are under the pressure of a presidential campaign in the line of fire. So to make a long story short, when he decided to run independent, our ballot lines were left open. And we've worked for decades to cultivate these ballot lines. They are, if running as an independent, one would have to spend well, RFK, for example, is trying to raise $50 million to get on the ballot. Another group, so-called No Labels, which you may have heard about, they never got to a candidate and they've since stopped their drive, but they were trying to raise $70 million. So you can't take this stuff for granted. It's when you have a grassroots network that learns how to do this and you cultivate your ballot lines and you keep them, you've got them. But if you don't use them, you're going to lose them. And that's what we were confronted with. So I gladly stepped up to the plate. And as we were preparing the campaign, then basically the genocidal war on Gaza began. And I was so, really grateful to be able to be a vehicle to fight genocide in this election. And that is where we stand right now and why I am so committed to this race, because there will be 3 pro-genocide candidates that you can be sure are on the ballot. Certainly Biden and Trump, and probably RFK. He's got the money to buy his way onto the ballot. He's probably going to do it. My hope is that they're going to divide the pro-genocide vote 3 ways, and that we can be a unifying vehicle for healthcare, for an economy that works for working people, for an end to crushing inequality, climate collapse, and endless war and genocide. So those all come together to make a very powerful and unstoppable campaign, especially given what's going on right now in the college campuses across the country. This is a powerful and unstoppable movement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Stein. And, speaking of the protest movements that we've seen across college campuses in the US, they're currently ongoing. Just today in MIT and UMass and, all across the country, we've been seeing that these incredible students, they don't give up. They keep coming back over and over again. And, just a couple of weeks ago, you and your campaign staff were assaulted and arrested at the University of Washington in St. Louis campus. You were there to support these protesters. And I was wondering if you could sort of speak to this moment, like in terms of what these student protests represent, what compelled you to join them that day, and what is your personal position on what's happening in Gaza right now?
Right. So the student protests, to my mind, represent the best of our society. They represent our highest values. They represent actually where the majority of the American people stand. We've seen that in poll after poll. One of the early polls in November done by Reuters showed 68% of Americans, in fact, want an immediate end to the genocide, a diplomatic solution, and an immediate ceasefire. So what the students are doing basically is in line not only with the American public, but also with the International Court of Justice, which has said that this is a plausible genocide. It is incumbent on all of us to do everything we can to stop it. And also with vote after vote in the United Nations, including the one vote where the US didn't stand in the way to veto it, that this is what the nations of the world want. Apartheid Israel and the US have really made themselves the pariahs among nations right now. And we're looking at the normalization of torture and murder of children on an industrial scale right now. This is absolutely unacceptable. My feelings about this, as a mother, as a medical doctor, seeing this really as a death watch for 2 million people every hour that people survive without having been, crushed by missiles and falling debris, or without having, just been under assault in any number of ways, and without having an epidemic break out, which people are at high risk for, being malnourished, not having any sanitation, not having water, being subjected to starvation. It's just like miraculous, hour by hour, that people are still surviving. So I find it's intolerable to witness this. It just violates our basic human values entirely. And I find that as a person who's not brain dead and who still has a beating heart, that one has to fight this. And, so that's kind of like, that's the basics of my approach to this. We have to do everything that we can, but as Gaza goes, we all go. This isn't just about doing the right thing for Gaza. This is whether there is a future for human rights and international law. And it's either international law or the law of the jungle, and that's our choice. And it pretty much makes itself. So I feel like we're in very good company. We are fighting, however, an old system, and it will take a lot of strategic work to stop this genocide, and then to proceed from there to address occupation and apartheid, assuming we can stop the genocide. And I wouldn't make any assumptions here about what's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but it really requires our dedication, hour by hour, to make this happen.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a long-term struggle. It doesn't end with a ceasefire. So the struggle is long, and yes, the commitment needs to be there. So just sort of going on with this, the Israeli-Palestinian context that we have right now, we've seen a gradual erosion of our democratic ideals, mostly in the way that we've seen most recently in the way universities have cracked down against these students, curtailing their First Amendment rights, their rights to free speech and expression, and also the way, HR 6090 was just passed in the House, where speaking against the Israeli government's policies is tantamount to anti-Semitism. And in addition, like you said, about 68% of the American electorate right now wants a de-escalation of the conflict, wants a permanent ceasefire, and yet we have the Biden administration continuing to send weapons to Israel, either surreptitiously or overtly. What does that say about the state of democracy in this country, and how would you confront special interest groups? You've said how you've done it in Massachusetts, but how would you do that at a national level if you became president?
Great. Okay, terrific. So our democracy is on life support. And this is another one of the reasons that we wanted to stand with the students at Washington University in St. Louis. And I didn't fully answer your question there, but I can overlap a little bit in responding here about democracy, because that is what the students are standing for, not only for to shut down this genocide, but also to fight for our rights to free speech, our right to protest for redress of grievances, and the effort to mischaracterize the fight against genocide as anti-Semitic is preposterous and absurd, and I find offensive as a person of Jewish background. To me, that's like saying that, to say that fighting genocide is anti-Semitic is like saying it's okay with Jews to conduct genocide. The Jews are okay with genocide, and this is like the most anti-Semitic thing you could possibly say. Our democracy really is in terrible shape right now. In my view, that's inseparable from the fact that money is very concentrated into few hands right now, which is extremely powerful, and that erodes democracy on all fronts. There's a famous saying from Louis Brandeis, former Supreme Court justice, that we have a choice between vast concentrations of wealth or democracy. In this country, we have chosen vast concentrations of wealth, and it only gets more and more concentrated by the year. Right now, 3 billionaires in this country has as much wealth as 50% of the population. And when money is very concentrated, and when you have a political system that is funded by private money, that's just, that's a devastating combination, and it basically buys out our democracy, which is how come we've kind of gotten worse and worse. Special interests are extremely powerful. So how do we fight this? Our strongest tool in fighting this is that the American people abhor the system. And across the political spectrum, people are up in arms that our political system has been bought out. So there's enormous consensus here to pass reforms and legislation. In the same way that we did that, in Massachusetts, we can do that nationally. And in my view, the president is not just the commander-in-chief. The president is the organizer-in-chief and helps empower people so that we can get behind legislation. So what is it that ordinary people can do? They can compel their elected officials to vote on their behalf. And how do they do that? Well, we've got to be able to hold town hall meetings again. This used to be an institution of government. Doesn't happen now because they don't want to meet with us. They don't want to face, the public disapproval. We also need to hold congressional hearings, another thing that has largely disappeared except for very partisan political purposes. So we can help empower American people with an understanding of what's happening, and also shame our elected officials into meeting with their constituents, because right now they meet with the lobbyists and with their donors. They have to start meeting with constituents. We need to get money out of politics. We need a clean election type system, across the board. We need to pass ranked choice voting so that our votes cannot be extorted out of fear, so that people can actually vote the way they want without some fear that, the vote might be divided and you might get an unintended result. That doesn't happen with ranked choice voting. We need to have access to
For
ballot.
those who don't know what ranked choice voting is, could you just explain, Dr. Stein, very quickly?
Sure. Yeah. So ranked choice voting is a system that does exactly what it says. Instead of just voting for one person for president or for governor, you rank your choices. And if nobody has a majority, then a runoff is held basically immediately. And, or to put that simpler, the person who has the fewest votes is eliminated. And if your first choice gets eliminated, your vote is automatically reassigned to your second choice. And that continues until there's a majority winner. So that ensures that the vote is never split, that someone is never elected because votes happen to divide up between, say, 3 progressive candidates and 1 conservative, then it's just like a product of happenstance that the conservative would win. Ranked choice voting ensures that the winner of the election is actually the person who has the most support. And it's a simple system. It's used around the world. It's used now in about 25 municipalities around the country, major municipalities. And it's used by the state of Maine. It's going to be voted on in the state of Oregon. It's a great system, but it is opposed tooth and nail by Democrats in particular, because they need to use fear tactics, because they can't earn your vote. So they have to, fearmonger their way to your vote. So that's the battle around ranked choice voting. There is essentially, an agenda of simple democracy reforms. Also, how about, conducting an antitrust lawsuit against Consolidated Media, so that we have, a more free media with many diverse points of view. Right now, we have like 5 large media conglomerates that control most of our news, and this is very bad news for everyday people. You have Julian Assange sitting in jail. Edward Snowden is banished from the country. Whistleblowers who've really blown the whistle on our on our government, acting in our name, committing war crimes, torture, and corruption. We need a press to watchdog this stuff, because the press is actually the only hope for a democracy to actually function. So these aren't rocket science. These are great reforms that people support. And if we're in a position of having the bully pulpit of the White House, we can move this legislation.
Thank you.
Great. Dr. Stein, I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to take it back to, in these dire circumstances, what I think has been the bright light shining, which is the youth. I'm the first to admit, as a proud mother, that the amount of stuff that my children, who are college-going age, have taught me is incredible. And I think it's made me a better citizen of not just this country, but of the world. How do you plan to harness this incredible student mobilization in support of your campaign? Because if you really see what the youth want, what are the things that they care about, including this particular issue and fighting against this genocide, your campaign is very much aligned with the issues that resonate with these young people, addressing racial and economic inequality, climate justice. What has the Green Party done to galvanize this particular demographic? And specifically in light of the current protests, how do you inspire them to join the movement and harness this power? And then maybe down the road, the same youth representing the agenda at various levels of government for us.
Absolutely. And given how youth have been betrayed and used opportunistically, hope and change by Barack Obama and Joe Biden, who made promises like that he was going to push back against student debt. He's done a little bit of that, but only for a very small percentage of people. So understandably, youth are extremely cynical. And I think it's very important that we approach youth to support them, and not to try to piggyback on their voting power. This is all about supporting them. And if we are doing that work, which we are very much doing, word will get out. And in 2016, when we were very much suppressed as a campaign, and when there wasn't nearly the public momentum to break away from the system that there is right now, at that time, we were cultivating student support. And, it was our campaign that launched the notion of bailing out students and canceling student debt. We were ridiculed for that in 2012. Then it was adopted. But that was coming from us. Also, the notion that public higher education should be free. Education should be absolutely free. This should be a birthright. How can you throw your young people into the turbulent waters of the economy when they don't have the skills and the training for it? It's like no society has ever survived by devouring its young. And that's kind of what the economy is doing right now. And, by going to people, at the Occupy protests, for example, going to campuses and supporting students and their struggles, and their struggles right now are everything. They can't afford places to live. They can't afford healthcare once they're out of their parents' plans. They don't have jobs that pay decent wages and allow them to pay back their student debts. They've been told that they should borrow this money and get into lifelong student debt, and, be a good citizen. And, and they've been screwed on that basis. So we're there to advocate on their behalf because it's the right thing to do. And that will carry over. That message will be heard. We went to the protest in Washington University in St. Louis because we were asked. We were at a campaign event that was close by, and the students asked us, would we please come and show support? And we said, of course. So we went, and we were just standing by in support, and they asked us, would you please go speak with the administration and see if you can de-escalate, which we tried to do. And then they were, well, would you please stand in line with us and, bring whatever protection you can help bring. So we did. We were at the front of the line facing the police, and, and we were beat up and brutalized along with the students. And it was so appreciated. I can't tell you, we did not do any electioneering, but we were greeted with go green, like all over the place once people saw that we were not hypocrites, and that we were ready to place our bodies on the line too. And in doing that, it doesn't begin to approach the sacrifice and the risk that students are taking, because it's their economic future, it's the whole thing. It's their graduation, it's their credits, it's their tuition. They're putting everything on the line now for us, for us to have a decent and livable world. So I have no doubt that, and in fact, I can tell you right now, some of the early polls have showed, this is before we've had any attention from mainstream media, because we've been very busy getting on the ballot. So the media campaigns will follow. But even without that, we are out there on social media. Our accounts are exploding. And a recent poll in Wisconsin showed that we were 8% in the general public, 8% in Wisconsin, but running 22% among people 30 and under, and 18% between 30 and 45. So word is out, and it is getting out, and it will continue. Our job is to get on the ballot, and to do that work first. And then there will be lots of means, and there's so much common cause here, especially around stopping the genocide, and standing up for our civil liberties. So, we're on the same track here. We're on the same pathway, and there are going to be lots of opportunities for building support.
I actually really do appreciate your answer, which flipped the question, which is, we're not going to go out canvassing for ourselves. They're going to come to us because we are supporting them. And I think that's exactly what has not happened in the long few decades. And I think the word betrayal is highly appropriate. I think in the beginning you said one thing which really spoke to me, and I wrote it down because this is a sentence that I've been using on a daily basis when I make my calls to to my congresswoman and my senators. And I say, it seems I'm seeing the best of our society and the best of our nation at the campuses, and I'm seeing the worst of it sitting in Congress and Senate at the moment. So I think what you've captured is beautifully said. Now, according to a recent Gallup poll, 63% of US adults, as we've all spoken, believe that the Democratic and Republican Party do such a poor job of representing them that a third major party is needed. This has become glaringly important in the light of how they have handled the Israel assault on Gaza, and more recently, the horrific crackdowns that we've seen and the violation of the constitutional rights of these students. Would you say, can you speak a little bit to what challenges you as a third-party presidential candidate face, and what is the realistic path to the presidency?
So we face all the challenges that they can throw at us, and this has just been like a way of life since 2002, the first time I ran for office, which was for governor in Massachusetts. We are systematically blacked out from media coverage, which makes it then very hard to fundraise. We are kept off the ballot. We have to jump through enormous hoops just to be a choice on the ballot. We are kept out of debates, although it now looks like they're keeping themselves out of debates as well. So, and then it's a money-sponsored system. We are a small donor campaign. We don't use the kind of loopholes that the Democratic and Republican parties use. We do not use super PACs. We do not accept money from corporate PACs. We run on the high road, and we're a volunteer-driven campaign and a small donor campaign. So using the loopholes that the Democratic and Republican parties use, this thing called victory funds, for example, is one of a few loopholes. Using victory funds, a single donor can write a $600,000 check. It will basically launder its way back to the presidential campaign. So this gives enormous power to single donors. We subscribe by the rules for ordinary mortals, which is that a maximum contribution of $3,300. Now that's more than most of our donors can afford, but that is, that's the limit that we observe. That's for the primary, and the same in the general. And our average donation is probably, last I checked, it was somewhere around $15, you know, per donation as a rule. So we play by the rules. And we are, you know, determined to make this campaign an option in a setting where otherwise people have 3 pro-genocide, pro-war candidates at a time when 68% of the public is up in arms about this genocide. So this is the path to victory. I'll tell you, the challenge is getting on the ballot right now in New York. New York is the most difficult. And let me say, we already have 75% of the work done to be on the ballot. Unlike the other independent candidates who are starting from ground zero, because we are a grassroots network, because we have been building ballot status for decades, we entered the race with a lot of the work done. The biggest and most expensive states are already done: Texas, California, Florida, Arizona. Those are the most expensive. The last remaining super expensive and difficult state is New York, where they tripled the ballot requirement in a poison pill in a budget bill, you know, so nobody even knew about it. This was intended to basically shut down political competitors in this race coming up now. So we are, you know, we are in an all hands on deck moment for people who can go to New York to help collect signatures. People have friends. We're, you know, because it's extremely expensive, you know, people who can make donations can really help right now, because we have to get professional support in addition, you know, et cetera. So the strategy going forward is, one, get on the ballot in New York, and we have about 3 weeks left to complete this. It's a 6-week drive. We had to collect basically 45,000 valid signatures. Just for comparison, in Massachusetts, it's, what is it, 10?
I think Mehlika and I were discussing, I thought it was 10.
I think that's right. Yes. But you have to collect twice as many because they have an army of attorneys for the explicit purpose of nitpicking you and finding little details like, did you sign your name, your middle name with an initial instead of your full name, which might be on your voter registration. So catching little trivial inconsistencies like that, they will throw names off the ballot. So, you know, in Massachusetts, we got to get 20,000, but in New York, because it's 45,000 valid, we got to collect 90,000 signatures in 6 weeks. You know, it's almost impossible. And this is the first time that it's ever happened. So we're in an all out fight now to be on in New York, because if you're going to challenge empire, you have to be on in every state, especially a big state like New York. Technically, you could win the election with the electoral college votes without winning New York, but it would be hard to do. And the powers that be will discount you. You won't get covered. You won't be considered a real campaign unless you're on in every state. So we are in an all-out fight right now to be on in New York. And fingers crossed, things are going well. A lot of people are stepping up to the plate, but we need all hands on deck. So anyone who has a weekend to spare, who could go to New York, you know, we can put you up, find you a place, et cetera. So that is step number one. Once we're on in all states, this battle really fights itself, because, you know, and also I should mention, we have qualified for matching funds. So we will be getting some cash. It'll come too late for New York, but it will help us with the remaining states, which are all far easier than New York. So it's going to be all downhill from New York once we get on. So we will complete the rest of the ballot drive. And once the worst of the ballot drive is over, then we can really start focusing on media, on getting bigger media appearances, and, you know, the on the ground appearances and the field work and so on. You know, it's just turning the crank, which can be done. It's not rocket science. And we're in a moment where people are so hungry, both to stop the genocide, and for many people, that's a red line. You know, people who couldn't step away from the Democratic Party before, in spite of all the betrayals. The genocide is a red line for lots of people. So we're seeing a lot of people turn out now at our events who never would have come to a green event before. But it's like the only, it's really the only politics of integrity right now that a lot of people can do. on healthcare, this is an emergency. Housing is an emergency for half of all renters who can't afford their rent right now. So there are so many emergencies which the Democrats and Republicans will not address and they will not meet. So this is, it's like there couldn't be a better time. This is really a perfect storm right now because of the extent of emergencies that people are facing in every dimension of their lives at a time when people have really had it and they are widely throwing in the towel. In this recent primary in New York State with the Democrats, where it was 12% uncommitted, which was, big victory. But in addition, it was 83% that didn't show up, that wouldn't come out. The vote count plummeted. And the election was otherwise very similar, an election that was basically already decided. Biden was already coronated, but people aren't coming out to support him. So the Democrats really know that their goose is cooked right now, which is why they are so vigorously trying to silence the competition. So once we get on the ballot, it's going to be 3 pro-genocide candidates, 1 anti-genocide. When a vote is divided 4 ways, it's possible to win it with as little as 26% of the vote. And we're running now in some polls 8%. So, it depends where, and it's still very much at the beginning. But Bernie Sanders, was running 2 and 3% for much of the primary before he broke through. So it's entirely possible that we can get from here to there.
And just for the audience that's listening, can you tell us how many ballots are you on at the moment, the Green Party?
So let me give you that information, but also what's more important is basically the quantity of work, because some ballot lines you can just collect like 600 signatures and you're on. So New Jersey is that way, for example. Whereas New York is 90,000 signatures you got to collect. So if you add up the total number of signatures that you have to get, that is what we have over 75% of, because it includes some of the biggest and most difficult states, California, Florida, Texas, et cetera. If you're counting per ballot line, it's somewhere around 22, but there are several states that are on the verge of turning in right now. And that will take us from 22 up to maybe 26 or 27. And then there are other states that haven't begun collecting yet. So I think the most useful number is that 75% of the work is done, is already behind us.
And for the benefit of the audience, that's the most further along a candidate is that's not Democratic or Republican.
With the exception of the Libertarians. The Libertarians are a corporate party. They get a lot of big money. So they're a little bit ahead of us. But if you're looking at a party that is anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker, we're the only one.
Great. And I know I spoke about it, you come alive at this question. But this is a genuine question for a lot of people that may be listening. Many want to vote for third party, but they are deterred by the argument where somebody will say to them, well, that's equivalent to voting for Trump per se. And I've heard your answer to this, but I'd love for the audience to hear your answer to this.
I abhor the thought of Trump being the president, and I also abhor the reality of Biden being president. And, this idea that one party owns your vote, and you have to justify not voting for them, is crazy. That's just propaganda that's gotten inside of your brain. Nobody owns your vote. They have to earn your vote. Has Joe Biden earned your vote by sponsoring this genocide, by giving Bibi Netanyahu essentially a green light to do whatever he does, including drag us into a war with Iran, which is what he seems to want to do? That's just nuts. Sending out the police, and praising the police for bashing heads basically on campus, supporting these cop cities where the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, which we now call the IOF, the Israeli Occupation Forces, for them to be trained up in these cop cities. And there are like 70 of them in the works around the country, where basically the IOF trains up our police, and and it's all downhill from there. That's why we're seeing, many of these horrible abusive tactics. The cops show up with riot gear and they create a riot. There was no riot until they got there. They are the riot, and the Zionist mob shows up together with the Proud Boys and they create a riot and they're given a pass. Nobody wants to follow up with them. Nobody's keeping them off campus. Nobody's arresting them. They're given a license to go ahead and beat the students. This is the world we're living in right now. How you don't apply the word fascism to this, I don't know. This is what fascism looks like. We don't have to wait for Donald Trump to get to fascism. We have it right now, and there's no greater trademark of fascism than genocide. So I'd say don't let them talk you out of your power. Your vote is your power. It's the only power that we have. And we have to stand up and use that power. It's like, are you going to believe your own lying eyes, or are you going to believe the political elites who are telling you to just keep voting the way you've been voting while you get thrown under the bus and our world is being thrown under the cliff, whether you're looking at the climate collapse. And if we had time, we could go into Joe Biden's climate policies, which are not friendly to the climate. He's done some of the most terrible things to the climate possible. And I'll just name it quickly: these 22 liquid natural gas export facilities that have been built, most of them in the wake of the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage, which opened up a new market. And it was all high fives, on Capitol Hill. High fives. Oh, great. We've got a whole new market now to sell, new fracked gas, which is the most destructive, fossil fuel emission that there is. Anyhow, Biden is giving the thumbs up to 22 of these new plants, they don't get counted because they're considered offshore, but hello, we're creating them. And they amount to 440 new coal plants being built with Joe Biden's approval. 440 new coal plants is enough to knock back all progress on climate emissions back to the year 2005. And it's worse than anything that Trump ever did. I mean, this is like the single most destructive thing to the climate. So bottom line is, forget the propaganda that tells you that you're powerless and that the future is hopeless. That's baloney. It's only true if you accept it. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have the power. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. We have to be making that demand. If you silence yourself, if you let them talk you into silence and powerlessness, then we are powerless. However, if we use the power that we have, we can totally transform the future, and we can do that right now.
Absolutely. I mean, the last comment I would make to that is, how many of us voted for Biden and are just sitting in utter shock that I thought this is exactly what we were trying to avoid by voting for him, and look what we have. So I think it's something to think about, because you thinking you're going to go do something and you're going to actually keep fascism out, I think it's here full blown and center.
And I think
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think we might have a follow-up question to that particular question, Dr. Stein, only because, people are still so terrified about another Trump presidency. And so they might push back on that. And we'll get to that question later. There is a question that I'd like to get to now, since we've started the Q&A for the audience. It says, while I was trying to persuade a friend, this is from Willa McHenry. While I was trying to persuade a friend to support Dr. Stein, his response was that he likes her platform, but wishes she had a legislative track record so that voters could see a history of how she votes on important issues. Since she's not a career politician, what would Dr. Stein suggest that people look at as an equivalent for quantifiable evidence of her track record?
So actually, I was an elected official at the local level in the let's see, it was after my first race. So it was approximately 2004. I was a representative at my town level in town meeting. And, it's hard to dig up, town meeting votes from that far away. But, you can be sure that my votes were very consistent with a public interest agenda. And, at the local level, the fights are all about the real estate industry and what they're going to take over and whether you'll have affordable housing. And, so I was very consistent, on those votes. And I was very, I think the biggest things that I did as a local representative was to fight the power of the real estate industry, which was trying to seize public assets, including public lands and public buildings that normally, when the state offloads them, they normally go to the local communities. But there was legislation at the legislative level that was going to shortcut that so that it could just be auctioned off. The state could just auction it off to the highest bidders instead of keeping it kind of in the public domain. And so I was very involved in mobilizing communities across the state in order to fight that bill. We called it the fast track auction law that enabled the state to fast track these auctions and make a killing on them and sell them to the highest bidder, to sell these very valuable properties, especially open space, to big real estate developers. And, and it was just awful and unconscionable. So, that actually did get some, that has public record, if anybody's interested in tracking down the fast track auction law. And we kept fighting it year after year. We kept defeating it, and the real estate industry kept bringing it back, and we kept defeating it. Over that same period of time, I led a coalition called the Massachusetts Coalition for Healthy Communities. And that track record is very clear, where we lobbied and fought, lobbied with our voices, not with money. But we were fighting basically for a progressive agenda for green jobs. In fact, we sponsored a non-binding referendum in our communities across Massachusetts to stop, well, I should say, to actually to take money away from corporate giveaways and instead put it into the creation of green jobs at the community level, to create jobs that would help green our environment and our energy system and things of that sort. And actually, now that I think about it, the bio that was read at the very start really tells you what my track record is. And while I wasn't an elected official, I was a community advocate fighting for Medicare for all, fighting to get money out of politics, fighting to clean up our coal plants and shut them down, to clean up toxic waste sites, and to protect children's health through better regulation of mercury exposure through fish and things of that sort. So, I have been, I've gone to the mat on those things. The easy way out would have been, to take a very different route, especially when I was under attack for challenging the system. And coming out of 2016, I was, I was accused, along with the Russiagate scandal, I was accused of being a Russian asset. And I was investigated by the Senate Intelligence Committee for 3 years on that account, and, at the end of 3 years, they thanked me very much and basically said there was absolutely nothing that violated any protocol or, or standard anywhere. So I've basically been to the mat and back, and I would challenge anyone to find a reason, other than the public interest here in my track record. So I think it stands, it stands on its own terms. I have been, lured by an offer, to would I please run as a Democrat, and I declined to do that based on the principles for which I had become a Green, which was that I did not want to be part of a big money party where you're dictated to by big donors. So, that's kind of the full story as to why I think people can be confident that what you see is what you get. And I have to say that most people can smell a rat. And if you get into a room with a politician, you can tell if they're a rat. And I haven't had that problem, and I hope to be in a room with you someday so that you can do the smell test yourself.
I think many of us look forward to that. I'll ask the next question. It's very interesting. It's by Adil Qureshi. With big money on either side of the two big parties, it's a very long, drawn-out fight for the Green Party, or any other third party for that matter, until you can win big. What is the strategy to win small but still be able to make a difference in major policy questions like the genocide that's ongoing right now?
So let me just say that we have totally transformed the progressive agenda. If you look at Medicare for All, that came from Greens, from Ralph Nader's run in 2000. He was the first person to put healthcare as a human right into the agenda. We have transformed the agenda on student debt, on free public higher education, on ranked choice voting, on demilitarization of our foreign policy, and on a Green New Deal and green energy. We developed the Green New Deal, and then the Democrats took the traction out of it and made it a Green New Deal light, which won't do the job because it's all they do is talk about producing renewables, but it doesn't do you any good to produce renewables unless you're also phasing out fossil fuels. So I'd say we've made a huge difference already. We have already set the agenda. We've raised the bar. We have many local elected officials, over 1,000 that have been elected over the last decade or two. We currently have somewhere around 150 local electeds. And we are the only party, the only non-corporate party that survives. Normally non-corporate parties are eliminated. They are over and done with in 10 years. And that hasn't happened with Greens. We have enormous staying power. They're not going to get rid of us. We are the elephant in the room. So though we might appear weak, we're like weak compared to all the other small parties who've been wiped off the face of the earth. They're just not part of the political landscape. The Peace and Freedom Party, for example, we have a lot in common with. They were founded in the 1970s, and at one time they had as much as maybe 17 or 20 ballot lines. Now they're in one state, basically, in California. So we are the giant among these parties, and we will be denigrated as being small and powerless. But considering what we're up against, we're extremely powerful. And I think that breaking point might be where we are right now. And while we continue to fight at the local level, we also fight at the national level. We would not have forced a Green New Deal. We would not have forced all these other, in the same way that the labor movement, and the independent socialist parties and labor parties of the early 1900s brought the labor agenda. In the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. They will adopt your agenda if you put it out there and you push it. And that in and of itself, in my view, is enough reason to keep doing what we're doing. And right now, around the issue of genocide and the endless war machine, we have such a powerful moment because the American people are not buying this. And then there are other aspects of this story, which is that this is not only a moral outrage and a moral imperative, but the endless war machine, of which genocide is an expression, the endless war machine is bankrupting us. It takes half of our congressional budget. The American people largely don't know this. And if we are on the ballot as the fourth candidate, this will be debated. This will be injected into the public discussion. The average family, according to Jeffrey Sachs, the economist at Columbia, who recently endorsed us, by the way, and he's now, an advisor to our campaign. The average American household is spending $12,000 this year on the endless war machine, of which genocide is a part. $12,000, $50,000 since the year 2000 and the 9/11, catastrophes. So as people learn more about this issue, if we can engage the issue, if we can challenge power, we can make this happen. Given the uprising that's going on our campuses right now, given the fact that Starbucks was just brought down, Starbucks has crashed because of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign. There is enormous now economic power as well as a moral imperative and the insight and unstoppable conviction of the younger generation. There are so many resources that are being brought to bear. I think it's nuts to let anyone talk you out of your power to help make that happen. And even if we don't get to the White House, even if we only get to 5%, suddenly there is now a powerful and visible coalition that refuses to be silenced and disappeared behind the lesser evil. If you support the lesser evil, you are disappeared. There is no movement pushing to end genocide and to end empire and oligarchy. You have to stand alone. You have to challenge power. You have to be that demand that Frederick Douglass talked about. And given what the stakes are, given how horrible Biden is, whether you're looking at the Republican policies that he has adopted on immigration, whether you're looking at the genocide, the militarism, the confrontations that Biden is promoting around the world, we're kind of ginning up a nuclear war on at least 3 fronts here. The guy is completely clueless. The guy is a warmonger, and he's been coronated by the Democratic Party because they too are warmongers and have been for quite some time, and this has been building. So this traditional thinking that the Democrats are the lesser evil, it's just, it's just like your circuits. Your circuits were trained, but your circuits need to go back to the drawing boards here because that doesn't apply anymore. It's like the lesser evil and this politics of fear has brought us everything we were afraid of. We have 2 lesser evil candidates. We need to stand up and fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because in fact they do, and the chance may not come again.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Stein. And, we have a couple of questions from Shafi and Alia that are about, once you get elected, what will be your policy agenda the first 100 days, and how will you how will you address the Israeli-Palestinian issue? But before we get to that, I think there is this one question about, in these polarized times, how does Dr. Stein plan to reach out to both registered Democrats and Republicans who are totally disillusioned by the current 2-party system?
On the issues, quite simply, because the American people across the political spectrum don't want this genocide. They are sick of being robbed by the endless war machine, which is denying us the things that we need here. Across the board, Democrats and Republicans, people are really hurting for healthcare. Our health is very poor, and all the more so among lower income and the poor. Our health is horrible. And, we see this rising tide right now of what's been called the diseases of despair, especially among people who are struggling economically right now. So there's a lot of common cause for a healthcare system as a human right through Medicare for All, which not only improves our health, it also saves us money, $500 billion a year. So this is like how we come together in an agenda that meets the really urgent human needs for rent control, for housing that we can afford, to pull back on the foreclosures, the evictions, and the homelessness, which are just, at record heights right now. So I don't see it being a problem once you get outside of conventional politics. And remember, it's 25% of Americans now who identify as Democrat, 25% who identify as Republican, and 50% who identify as independent. So I don't see the party thing being an impediment at all to our moving forward. Should I jump into the other question from Sheffy, I think it was, about what happens in the 100 days? So let me just start with what happens on day 1, because there's a lot that the president can do with the authority of the office starting on day 1. So starting on day 1, weapons stop. They stop flowing to apartheid Israel and to other, human rights abusers who U.S. law actually says we cannot, in fact, transfer weapons to them. And I think Saudi Arabia would be another important issue to look at here. But for sure, the flow of weapons to Israel stops, and as well as support to Israel. The UN Secretary General, I think, called for the beginning of sanctions used against Israel. I think given what's going on right now, it's time for those sanctions right now. We should not be in the business of supporting this grand finale here to the ethnic cleansing and the genocide, which is going on right now in Rafah. This is absolutely horrific. And how can our government be standing by right now and allowing this to happen? This is the time to end the flow of weapons and support to Israel while they are conducting a genocide on steroids, in fact. So we can do that on day 1. The weapons stop. On day 1, we can also declare a climate emergency. which then stops in its tracks the development of these liquid natural gas export facilities that amount to creating 440 new coal plants in terms of, the final blow to the climate, which is really going over the cliff right now. Declaring a climate emergency also unleashes hundreds of billions of dollars so we can start in on the Green New Deal, creating the jobs that are desperately needed, especially in the low-income impacted communities, which are suffering from fossil fuels, from the pollution and their health and so on. So all of that can begin on day one. We also, we end the war on drugs on day one, which is one of the major drivers of the migration crisis. And the violence that's associated with the drug cartels, it comes to an end when the war on drugs stops, and when substance use is treated as a public health problem and not as a criminal problem. So we pull the rug out from under that, and we prioritize providing health supports for people who are struggling with addiction and so on. On day one, we also begin the first of the coordinated campaigns, with the president acting as organizer in chief. And the first campaign will actually be for Medicare for All, because it's motherhood and apple pie, and it pays for itself. It saves us actually $500 billion a year, which then can go a long way to fund some of the other things that we need. So that would be, kind of our first and most urgent priorities. And along with that, I would add that fighting for a decent and humane budget that uses our resources not to set the world on fire, which is what we're doing with half of our discretionary congressional dollars right now. Instead, those dollars, we cut the military budget 50%, maybe more than that, and we start using those dollars for true security here, addressing the urgent needs of the American people for housing and education, raising the floor on education across the country, because right now your education and your future in K through 12 depends on how valuable your real estate is, and that assures that them that got is going to keep getting, and them that don't, will continue to be thrown under the bus. So that changes. We will fight for an education system that provides quality education to everyone. That will make a huge difference. So those are among our compelling priorities, and how we're going to mobilize to actually make that a reality.
Dr. Stein, thank you so much for that. We've gone over a bit. Is it okay to ask one last question?
Sure. Yeah, I'm fine on time.
So a lot of us have this dream thing of a combined ticket with Dr. Stein and Dr. West. We completely understand he was part of the Green Party and stepped away to be an independent candidate. Is there any possibility of seeing that?
In my mind, there is, absolutely. And I have said as much, publicly. For whatever reason, Dr. West does not seem to be open to that at the moment, but minds change. Minds change all the time. And I have been a student of politics for long enough to know that you have to try to keep options open to make this, as powerful a political movement as possible. And to know that however powerful and compelling a single voice is, and Dr. West has always been the most powerful and compelling voice, this empire is so big that you have to have an infrastructure that you're not building on the fly, and you have to constantly improve it. It's never perfect, but you have to struggle with these organizations. All of us, I think, who are members of organizations know that they have their drawbacks, and you have to work with what you've got and make it better from there, because there's so much strength in numbers that we can never have as individuals fighting in a single race. We have to be a part of something that has a history and that has a future going forward. So, I would welcome efforts to try to, bring Dr. West into alignment here in the longer haul.
And I think we should also point out, Dr. Stein, that a lot of people, they do support Dr. West's sort of positions and everything. But in terms of comparison, in terms of your campaign and how far along you are on the ballot compared to Dr. Cornel West, which I believe his campaign is on 3 ballots currently, is on the ballot in 3 states. And then RFK Jr., who thought perhaps a lot of people thought was way ahead, is actually only, according to their campaign, only on the ballot in 10 states. So far behind where you are. Although verifiably, they've, only 3 states have verified that RFK Jr. is on the ballot. So I think you are far ahead in that respect. And I might be wrong, but I think Dr. Cornel West already perhaps had chosen a VP pick. Anyway, but we can always hope. So let's see how that goes. And we're so out of time right now. I wish we could have continued this conversation, Dr. Stein. Thank you so much for your generosity, for your time that you've given us, for sharing with us your policy agenda. We wish you all the luck in the future. And if anybody here would like to help Dr. Stein with her campaign, getting her on the ballot, we have already shared the link, Jill Stein 2024, ballotaccess.com. There are names of every point person in every state who can help. You can contact and volunteer to help her get her on the ballot. So there's always that option. If you'd like to visit our website, please visit Community Alliance at CA4, as in the number 4, pj.org. And our next event is going to be on May 21st with Nadia Milleron. She is running as an independent against Congressman Richie Neal in Massachusetts' 1st Congressional District. But again, on behalf of all of us, Dr. Stein, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Likewise, thank you. It's been a really wonderful, inspiring conversation. So keep up your great work. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.